As you probably most of you have my leaflets, I am a veterinary surgeon in Malvern. I run my own practice, which I started up about 30 years ago. Mainly companion animals, don't do a lot of farm work, although I was quite involved in the foot and mouth outbreak. I should say foot and mouth fiasco, really, of 12 years ago. So I'm a small business owner, so I'm one of 5 million small business owners, and small businesses, as you all know, make this country tick, and the 99% of the businesses in this country. I'm an employer, I'm a taxpayer, I'm a tax collector, and I'm not ashamed to say that I'm also a patriot.
Yes.
Yeah.
I happen to love my country.
Yes.
And I joined UKIP in 1995, and some of you probably think, oh, UKIP going there, and actually we were. Mainly because I was convinced that Britain would be much better off outside the European Union. Not for any sort of, not out of any nostalgic reasons, or not because I was harping back to the days of empire, but I was just convinced that Britain would be better off as a free nation outside the EU. And of course we're now ruled by a rather political elite who are out of touch with the general public, and people like me feel that we don't have an awful lot in common with them. They are, as the saying goes, I think, all career and no conviction. Well, I have a career, and I also have a conviction, but not one I hope is going to put me behind bars. UKIP, I think I remember UKIP. It's been a bit of a roller coaster over the years, but last year we were, no doubt, riding the crest of the wave. As you all remember, we won the European elections, as Jim will probably tell us, and Jim was elected as our MEP. And then we won those 2 by-elections where those actually quite brave Tory MPs defected to UKIP, and we were all absolutely delighted that they stood for election and got elected back in. And of course the general election campaign has gone on and on and on, hasn't it, with this 5-year term. All we've heard for the last 6 months has been Tory and Labour throwing brickbats at each other about the NHS, and then we hear who's going to debate with who, and the latest thing of course is who's going to be in a coalition with who. Well, I can tell you one thing, UKIP's going into a coalition with nobody, but of course we would support one side or the other depending on what the issue is. I could talk a lot about our policies in UKIP tonight, but I'm going to just focus on 2 or 3 little points. First of all, I'm going to take you down to North Devon, which is where I come from. And I got relatives who farm in North Devon. Nice farm, 350 acres, prime farmland, nice Devon farmhouse. You're probably aware of the EU directives on carbon emissions. Carbon emissions, we have to reduce our carbon emissions 20% by 2020, and of course this has led to a lot of green taxes, pushing up fuel bills, which in turn go to subsidise wind turbines on large estates like those owned by David Cameron's father-in-law.
What a surprise.
Well, we'll go down now to North Devon because with with the EU directives on carbon emissions, etc., the government has a pot of money. It's called the Renewable Heat Incentive, and it's available for people who want to put biomass boilers in. Now this is mainly businesses, big houses, this sort of thing. And they get a grant for putting a biomass boiler, in case you don't know, it's carbon neutral, and it burns on wood chips or possibly logs, but preferably wood chips. It's quite big, costs 20,000 to 30,000 to put in, get a 15% grant to put the boiler in, all very good. Then they come around and they assess the farmhouse, big 7-bedroom farmhouse, listed building, no double glazing, and they work out how much it would cost to heat that house per year. They only live in 3 rooms, but that's beside the point. And they come up with a nice round sum of £10,000, so they get paid £10,000 a year for the next 6 years. This is our taxes. But it goes on from there, because they're lucky enough to have woodland on the farm, so there's then the Woodlands Grant Scheme, where they're paid to thin out their woodland by 25%. So they've got plenty of wood to put into free wood to put into the biomass boiler, and because it's a little bit muddy going into the woodland, they also get £8,000 to build a nice track through the woodland. By just in case that runs out, they've also got another grant, a high level stewardship scheme, all to do with the EU Common Agricultural Policy, to plant native breeds of trees. So they've got plenty of free wood for the next 50 to 100 years. And then you compare that with perhaps a couple who haven't got a lot of money, sitting in their house, wondering whether they should turn the heating up or not. Something's not right somewhere. And that, of course, is all down to the European Union. Fizzy water. Pleased to say our leader's on now. I'm going to say a few words now about planning, because as most of you are aware, the population of this country has increased by about 6 million over the last 10 years. It's not all immigration, a lot of it's down to birth rate. The net immigration last year, you probably all know, was about 300,000. That's the size of a city of Portsmouth, or if you come from the North Hull, coming to this country about once a year. The actual total number of immigrants actually was about 600,000, but as we know, a lot of people from Britain actually go abroad to retire. Usually wealthy people go abroad to retire in Spain and likewise. So, of course, because of all these people, there's now a scramble, there's a shortage of housing, there's a bit of a scramble on to build houses. The big question, of course, is always where should they be built? And, of course, successive governments have made no provision, have they, for housing, no provision for increased hospital beds, etc., no provision for increased schooling. So where should they be built? And there's hardly a village around here that hasn't been affected by one application on a nice greenfield site or another, as some of you will be well aware. But there are brownfield sites about. The Campaign for the Protection of Rural England have come up with 66,000 hectares of brownfield sites available throughout the country, which would provide housing for the next 4 years, about 1 million houses. Developers don't like it. Developers like to start off with, as it were, a blank canvas, i.e. a greenfield site, no risk of contamination. That's what they like. Malvern Hills councillors, certainly 3 of them like greenfield sites because they're selling land or hoping to sell land for development. And you could say they've got a vested interest, and we all know it's totally wrong. UKIP would encourage brownfield sites with various grants, a brownfield bond, they'd remove VAT on conversions of buildings, and also take away stamp duty on new builds on brownfield sites. Also in the Malvern Hills District Council area, and I know we're in Wychhaven here, but in Malvern Hills District Council there's 1,028 empty houses, so there's a lot of properties that could be brought back into use. Another fact, the University of Cambridge recently came up with a report that said that there's going to be 2 million, we're going to be short of farmland by 2 million hectares by the year 2030 because of the amount of land that's going to biofuels, again producing renewable energy, and housing. As a last resort, greenfield sites might have to be used, but it should be local people that decide where these houses are built. Because what happens at the moment is, if the council, local council, turn down a planning application, the developers, Bovis, Persimmon, whoever it might be, they have a right to appeal. The government inspector comes up from Bristol and passes it. If it goes the other way, if the local council approve a housing application, the local people have no right of appeal. So there's something wrong, and it all seems to be rather biased in favour of the landowners and the developers. So I'm going to say no more about that. I'm just going to say a few words now. Did you just notice, I'm not really talking about immigration, but did you notice, Theresa May last week just said, did you notice that she said she was going to ban non-EU migrants with a criminal conviction?
Yeah, I believe that.
And you might say, well, why hasn't she done it before? Quite suddenly last week.
Yeah.
And in fact, on the very same day, 1,500 people from the migrant camp at Calais that disappeared.
Oh.
You might ask yourselves where they went, but of course we know where they went. I'm just going to say a few words about defence, because we are, as you know, the government voted only recently to guarantee 0.7% of GDP to go on foreign aid. I'm not going to say too much about that, except UKIP believes that you shouldn't guarantee that sort of amount, and that comes to about £12 billion a year. About a third of our defence spending, which is constantly being cut. And you know, if you go back 10, 20 years, we would never have guessed, would we? We were just thinking about sort of rapid reaction forces going around to flashpoints around the world. We wouldn't have known we would have had this sudden, rather frightening surge of the Islamic State in all various parts around the globe.
Thank you, Mr.
And we wouldn't have also thought that we got Russia, the Russians, knocking on the door of Eastern Europe. And at the moment, I think the Russians have about 2,500 tanks, and Britain, France and Germany together have 800. And most of the German tanks don't work either, so, you know, we wouldn't be much good. And as an island nation, you know, it's our duty. We need to defend ourselves and our interests and our economy and our interests overseas. And I think we really reduce our defences at our peril. And of course, the UKIP would go along with what NATO are asking us to do, which is spend at least 2% of our GDP on defence. Last year we had a bit of sort of hypocrisy, didn't we? Do you remember the EU asking Britain to pay an extra £1.7 billion a year on top of what we already spend because we've been relatively successful economically and they haven't been. So they asked us for another £1.7 billion. And I think David Cameron made a big show for the press of saying no, and I suspect there was some sort of deal done afterwards. But it's a bit of a cheek, isn't it, when the EU books actually haven't been signed off for 19 years. And if they were a public company, you know, they'd be out of business.
Be in jail.
They probably would be in jail. They would, because as we all know, a large percentage of their money, of their budget, can't be accounted for. So a lot of our laws are made in Brussels, as we know, 70% probably, from all sorts of things, to the size of an olive oil receptacle in a restaurant, to the wattage of your vacuum cleaner, to more serious things like carbon emissions and, you know, the climate control agenda and common fisheries policy and common agricultural policy, totally controlled by Brussels. And even now they want to, I think, introduce a law that means we have to have insurance if you had a ride-on lawnmower. Which actually mightn't be a bad idea because ours has got no brakes and my wife's tipped it over at least on occasion. So there you are. But you know, UKIP stands for, what do we stand for? Social mobility, people getting on in life, fairness, a system of justice where we are innocent until proven guilty, unlike the system in the EU where you tend to be guilty until you're proven innocent. But our main policy, of course, is coming out of the European Union. That's our cornerstone. Reinstating border controls, trading with whoever we want to trade with worldwide, not being tied into this stagnant trading bloc of the EU. There's a massive world out there. There's 2.2 billion people in the Commonwealth. Many of the Commonwealth countries with economies that are improving. And we're fed up with the out-of-touch politicians who live in their Westminster bubble. They venture out occasionally, don't they? Put on a hard hat, go to a factory floor, and they think they're, you know, the man of the people. And they only do it for short-term political expediency. The people of this country, I think they want a voice. And hopefully UKIP can give them that voice, and that's why tonight I'm asking you to support us. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Richard. I'll now pass you over to the second Richard Keel from Midwestern.
Good evening. Welcome to this meeting at Pershore. Wonderful to see you all. Well, my name is Richard Keel. I've lived in Worcestershire most of my life. I was actually born in Bromsgrove in the hospital there, but I was raised on the family farm in Himbleton. I currently live just down the road there now in Grafton, Flyford. Went to school in the village, went to school at Worcester, and finished my education at Evesham College. So I'd like to think I am a good, genuine local candidate for Mid Worcestershire, unlike some of the opposing parties who seem to have parachuted a man in from afar who fits I think the new qualifications. So I assume he's going to fast track his way to meet the rest of the Westminster elite. But I'm here, and I hope we're going to stop it. And with your help, we can do it. Anyway, more about me myself. Having finished my education as an agricultural engineer, I've since been self-employed all those years, all but 3 years when I was working in the US. I also now do construction work, and I also import tractors from the US for the collectors market. So I am, into international business. I have many troubles with international business. Not all of them caused by the EU, but I've got enough headaches because of it. One thing I really does get underneath my skin is the way the European or the imports. My tractors come in from the east coast of America, and the ships come into Antwerp in Rotterdam. The container is then unloaded and then reloaded onto another ship. Now these are now classed as European imports from Europe and not from the US. This is just one of the many instances of where Europe is just fudging everything just to suit them, and we're not hearing the truth. Anyway, as you all know, this country is paying a lot of money into Europe. And according to the Telegraph, there's an article quite recently, in 2013, this country actually paid £14 billion in, of which we received £5 billion back out, leaving a shortfall of £9 billion. Well, we keep hearing how Labour are going to do this and the Conservatives are going to do this. They've all got their magic answers. They're going to put so many billion into this part of the thing. We're going to put some money into the NHS. But they've got to find it from somewhere else. They'll take it from somewhere else. Now UKIP, we've actually worked this all out. We've got it all costed. You will actually see the main manifesto will be coming out shortly. You keep hearing ideas of ours in the news. I mean, Mr. Canman's latest idea, he's going to give free tuition to engineers, kids that want to do engineering courses. Well, we've been shouting about that one for months. So he obviously thinks he can't beat us, so he wants to join us. But I think, us people, we're cleverer than him. We can work it out. So straight away, there's the thing. Where are we going to get this money from? Well, we've just found £9 billion saving on our European payments. So we pull out of Europe, we've got £9 billion to put back into this country. We can put £3 billion straight back into the NHS. We can get more doctors and nurses. We also want to train more doctors and nurses. Free tuition for people that want to become doctors and nurses. Let's train our own staff. British is best. People from Britain doing British jobs. We know we're going to have to bring in a few professionals from overseas. We don't mind people coming into this country as long as there's a need for them. They understand our language. They speak our language so we can understand them. They're coming on a controlled visa system, much the same that I had to go to the US on, where I had to fill in a number of boxes to prove I wasn't taking the job of a US citizen. Then I was allowed to go and work there. I paid my taxes. I had health insurance. And as long as I had all those criteria, I could work there. And when my visa was up, I actually got up on a plane and came home. Wouldn't it be nice if that happened in this country? It's so simple. Why aren't the other parties doing it? Well, they can't. They're virtually the same. They're all running under diktats coming out of Brussels saying, you have to run your party like this, you have to run your party like that. So, like people say, don't want to vote so-and-so, well, they might get in. Well, to be fair, it doesn't matter who are that lot if they got in, they're all going to do the same thing. Labour, Conservative, Liberals. What have they done for us the last 15, 20 years? Nothing. We need change. Vote UKIP, you will get UKIP. Look what happened in Clacton. Look what happened in with Mark Reckless in Kent. he went in there. They say like the 280th something most unlikely seat for us to win, and we won it. We beat them. Mr. Cameron was going to chuck the kitchen sink at it. Well, it didn't happen, did it? UKIP got in. People wanted UKIP, they voted UKIP, and they got it. And then in Manchester, in Middleton and Hayworth, the same day that we had the Clacton by-election, very safe Labour seat. Well, we went up there and ran a campaign, and we came within 617 votes of taking a very strong Labour seat. And believe you me, across the north of England, UKIP are going to beat the Labour candidates in many an area. My sister-in-law lives in Consett. Well, we all know Consett is about as left can get. Well, there she is. She lives in a terrace house in Consett. These are people that used to work in the mines and in the ironworks there, which are all no longer there. They've always voted Labour. Not one of them is voting Labour. Labour's turned their back on the working class of this country. They're all voting UKIP. Miliband is not going to get in. He's going to get beaten. And we can do it by keep taking more seats. So don't worry about Mr. Miliband getting in. He ain't going to get in. He's the best asset that this country's got for keeping Labour out. Anyway, back onto all this money that we've saved by pulling out of Europe. As I say, we've got $3 billion to put into the NHS. Also, with our visas and controlling our borders, we can say who's coming in and who's not coming in. Well, if you're coming into this country, it'll be a bit like America. You better have some health insurance.
Yes.
And if you've got some health insurance, you can come in. Well, that will save us $2 billion a year. Because at the moment, our National Health Service is the International Health Service. So, we're throwing money all around the world. So let's stop that. There. Now we've just basically put $5 billion into the NHS. And when you do the sums. That's a lot of doctors and nurses. As I say, we're going to have a work permit if we know what's going on there. Folks are going to come in with a health insurance. Also, Labour and the Conservatives had a bit of an idea of getting the health service better, new hospitals or whatever else. Anyway, Labour thought, great idea. Private finance agreement. Well, where we've got all these nice shiny new hospitals at a big cost. Private business goes and funds our new hospitals. But if you want to go and buy a packet of aspirin, you like me will probably go to Morrison's or Tesco. We pay 30p. Hospitals, they're paying over £3 a packet because it's in their contract. And you hear stories, hundreds of pounds to change a light bulb. Friend of mine, she works in the drug industry, sells pharmaceutical drugs. Mostly from the urology area. So anyway, she goes into the urology department in a hospital. Nice shiny poster. The men can sit there and while they're waiting for their appointment, read about what could be wrong and everything. Informative poster. Can we put this on the wall? Oh no, you can't do that. We don't own that wall. That belongs to a management company. It's a hospital. Hospitals should have things on the walls to do with patients in hospitals. That's private financing initiatives for you. Well, we'd love to get rid of them all now. Realistically, we can't. But we will encourage them to be terminated as quickly as possible, and we won't have any more. We want to put control of our hospitals back into the local areas again. Take big business out of it. No private health care. Hang on, getting a muddle. What we want free health care for us at the point of use. Those entitled to it will have free health care. And that's the way it's going to be. But if we carry on the way things are going with the other politicians, they're going to start privatising it. They're talking about charging you to see your doctor, charging you for nights in hospital. This is not the way forward. We need to keep it free at the point of use. And with UKIP and with the money that we've saved from Europe, we can do it. Another great European white elephant. They talk about high-speed rail between Birmingham and London. Well, sounds a wonderful idea. Who came up with that idea? Well, I haven't heard it in this country, but where it has come from is Europe. Trans-European Rail Network. The boffins of Brussels have come up with this idea, how we can get from here to there if we build all these fancy, fast railways. Well, if you live just outside the station in London, and you live a few miles from the station in Birmingham, it's going to save you 20 minutes or half an hour. But if you just live up the road in Wolverhampton, by the time you actually get into Birmingham, into the terminal, on the train, go whoosh to London and get there, it's actually taking you longer than going to Wolverhampton station, getting on the regular Virgin service and straight to London. I mean, it's just chucking money at the country. You know, we're overcrowded, land is at a premium, tearing a line straight to the countryside, straight through communities, for a very few people to benefit, and the rest of us are going to pay, and it's going to cost hundreds of pounds per person to pay for it. Yeah. Why do we need it? We don't. We've got some perfectly good railway networks in this country. Yes, they need a bit of investment and updating, but putting these great big white elephants straight across the country is not the way forward. And where's it going to end? It ain't going to end at Birmingham. They want to take it all the way to Holyhead. They want to go all the way over the country with it. It's just the beginning of more. There's more of it to come if you stay in Europe. Now, we need to get out of Europe. We need to control our country ourselves. And ideally with local representation. From at the lowest level, you know, parish councils, you've got good local people on parish councils. But when it comes to district and county council, in this area, we are fielding candidates. In Wychavon, we have all our key seats covered. You know, we've got good candidates for the key areas. But wouldn't it be nice if we could have a candidate in every area? I mean, if anybody here is interested in doing their bit, you know, and wants to try and help at grassroots level, you know, come and see us afterwards. We'd love to have more candidates on the local council. So the drink is getting a bit thirsty all this talk.
You know, you said that all in one breath.
Right, so I've touched on the health. I've touched a bit on the immigration. A little bit more on the immigration. Somebody said, who's going to look after all our borders? Well, you know, we've got some darn good service people that are in our forces, that when they come out of the forces, they want a job. Well, these people will be the best people to work on our border control, or if they wanted to, they could become police officers. You know, we've got good trained people that have done their bit for their country, and they'll be glad to do a bit more. And going to policing, you keep hearing this thing about, oh, crimes are falling, you know, we don't need so many police officers. Well, you speak to a police officer who's actually on the beat, and you'll find that they're understaffed and they're overworked, all because of all the cuts that keep coming out of Westminster. You know, Theresa May keeps cutting it all, but I would say most of us would agree that you need frontline services, and all these governments are trying to do at the moment is cut them here, cut them there, just to get a bit more money. Well, pull out of Europe, get all the money in the world, because you're not throwing it away, you're keeping it at home. Right, well, I think you've probably heard enough of me ranting on. No doubt you'll have some more questions later, so you know, we'll hear what Jim's got to say, and I'll sit down and shut up.
Thank you, Richard. Over to you, Jim.
Well, there's nothing left to say, is it? So,
I'm sure you'll think of something.
you hear about the two Ronnies, we've got the two Richards. So, and I'd like to say thank you very much to you both. And I know, Richard, you're new to this, and I think, ladies and gentlemen, you spoke really well tonight. And what I think we see in both the Richards, Richard who's actually been, and he's one of the few people I can strangle, because I joined the party 19 years ago, but he's been in it a year longer than me, so I can't claim to be the longest serving UKIP member. So,
and you're an MEP, Jim, and I'm just cleaning your boots, is that
yeah, he's only more as a veterinary surgeon. So, but what I think I take most from that those speeches just now was something that's missing in politics nowadays, and that's the P word, it's passion. And what I feel that shows is that the people who are coming forward and going through the candidate selection process and standing for UKIP are doing it for one reason and one reason alone, and that is for passion and belief in their country. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The last time I was here was just before the European election, I believe, back in the heady heights of, when was that, would have been April, May time, would it, 2000?
I think it was April last
Was it
year.
April last year? And wasn't it a fantastic time? You know, it was. We went on and we caused a huge shock. But things have moved forward so much since then. You know, I find myself sitting in the Parliament now with 23 other members of the European Parliament from UKIP, and of course I'm one of 3 here in the region. I've got Bill Etheridge and Jill Seymour, so we have 3 MEPs covering this region. And people often say to me, well, what's it like there as an MEP? What's it like? Well, if I can tell you with my hand on my heart, it is horrible, because I've been elected to an institution where, as a so-called parliamentarian, I don't even have the ability to initiate legislation, because legislation in the European Parliament can only be initiated through the European Commission. And it strikes me that who are the people who are lobbying this European Commission? There are 20,000 Eurocrats working there. And to my mind, it's all about big business. Because what we're getting from Europe, from the European Union, is regulation, regulation, and even more regulation. And of course that is coming through the lobbying power of the pharmaceuticals, the big businesses, who are going out their way to regulate, over-regulate our small and medium enterprises to make them less competitive and less able to deal with these forced market changes through this bureaucracy. And we need to remember that 70% of the laws that govern the productive sector of the United Kingdom, not just the UK, but indeed the European Union, now emanates in the forms of some sort of directive or legislation from Brussels. And of course it's nigh on impossible to amend or change any of those regulations, because to do so you need the agreement of all 28 member states. So it only takes one country to say, you know, we don't agree with you on that, and that's the end of the story. And this is why Mr Cameron really is doing a very good impression of King Canute sitting on the side of the shore, commanding an end to these tides of regulations. And of course we all know what happened to King Canute. It's exactly what we're seeing with the European Union. You know, the Prime Minister says, oh, we're going to bring back control of our fishing grounds. He can't do it. He knows he can't do it. And quite frankly, he's deceiving the British people. If I say, what's it like out there? What are the people like? Well, one story that strikes me particularly was when we first turn up as new boys, new boys and girls, it's all very exciting. It's all very exciting. And I queue up, and you have to go through this registration process where they need you to sign various pieces of paper, you know, confirming any outside interest you've got, any outside salaries, all sorts of, you know, your personal details, your next of kin, signature, and photographs taken for your pass, and all this sort of stuff. And it's generally done by, it's split into, each table would have been responsible for 4 different delegations, i.e. 4 different countries. And you'll generally find that the Hispanic groups, you know, the Spanish and Portuguese, the Italians would all be together, because the linguistic skills of those civil servants would be based on those 3 or 4 languages. So I find myself queuing up in a line of new or returning MEPs, and I look on the wall and there's a sign that says United Kingdom, Denmark, Sweden and Ireland. So I think, okay, so I'm queuing up, and so I'm standing there waiting. There's this rather pretty, middle-aged lady like myself standing in front, and I'm looking around, and she's looking around, and I say, oh, you've just been elected as well? She says, yes, yes, yes. And couldn't quite sort of get the accent. You know, I said, yes, yes, I have, yes. It's all right. So, yeah, I said, it's a bit like your first day at school. Yeah, yeah, you know. I said, oh, we needed to pack lunch, you know, and fasting the time of day. And all of a sudden, I saw the look on her face, because it suddenly dawned on this lady that she was speaking to a UKIP MEP for the West Midlands. And you could just see the sort of, oh, and she wasn't quite sure. But the stranger thing was, at exactly the same moment, I looked at this lady, and I realised that I was speaking to a Sinn Féin MEP for Highland Sound. But what is quite bizarre about this place is that you often find that it's the parties who are sort of the central Eurosceptic parties like UKIP often find themselves voting not just with the parties of the far left like Sinn Féin, and the Greek socialists, the Spanish socialists, but you are finding yourself voting with countries like from the far right, you know, Le Pen and people like that. And that's what's very interesting, because what we're all campaigning for is a very old-fashioned word. That's a word that I believe very strongly in, and that is sovereignty. And that is the ability to be able to pass your own laws. And so the issue of Europe transcends all the traditional boundaries. And in fact, you only need to go back to the 1975 referendum to see that, of course, when we had Tony Benn on the left and Enoch Powell on the right, both campaigning on this central issue with people like Michael Foot on the issue of sovereignty. And that is a great issue. Europe is a great issue that transcends traditional party boundaries. But of course, things have changed now, because what we're seeing is, as Nigel Farage so eloquently says, our political parties seem to have morphed into one. They're all sort of saying pretty much similar things. And as he says, you can't put a fag paper between the three of them. Well, you certainly can't on the issue of Europe, because if I see the experience I have as an MEP, how the political parties get together to keep the smaller Eurosceptic groups out, it's quite apparent that they are very committed to the cause of ever-increasing union. And I was quite pleased. I always had an interest in the wider world, and I've always felt that Britain can take our place in the wider world. And Nigel, I was delighted, appointed me to be the UKIP representative on AFET, which is the Foreign Affairs Committee. And what frightens me so much is, quite frankly, this neo-imperialism, this evangelical approach to making the European Union bigger. It's as if they are so insecure now, because they see what is happening with the tragedy emerging across the Eurozone, certainly in the southern Eurozone countries. They actually seem to need to push for even more countries to join the European Union to make themselves feel more secure. It's almost sort of a parody, really. And I found myself on, I think, my second parliamentary session in Strasbourg, voting on an association agreement. Now, an association agreement is an agreement that's made between the legal entity, the European Union, and any country, and with a view to building up eventually to joining. And it's generally a very complicated process. You have various committees. I sit on foreign affairs. You have development. You have regional committees. You have international trade. There are soap fisheries. So generally, if an association agreement is going to be signed, it has to go through the correct protocol and all aspects of the association agreement before it comes to the actual votes by the MEPs in the Parliament. It's dealt with by each individual committee. Now, of course, there was a mad rush to sign an association agreement with Ukraine. Now, generally speaking, as I say, the process takes a very long time. But what struck me in only my second session, we found ourselves voting on an association agreement with Ukraine, which hadn't even been looked at by the International Trade Association. That was how desperate they were to push through this political statement of support for the Ukraine, because, quite frankly, from my point of view, and I really am no fan of Mr. Putin, I think he's a particularly nasty piece of work, it struck me that the European Union were so hell-bent on expansion east into former Soviet countries that they were prepared to forego the usual parliamentary protocol to push ahead. So what we found was the agreement was rushed through behind the scenes, all behind, it's very smoke and mirrors, all behind closed doors. The diplomats got their heads together and worked out what they wanted. And it's such a theatre, this Parliament, it's such a theatre. And some of the people in there that, you've got old man Le Pen, who's, to the right of Genghis Khan, and you've got a really, really interesting guy who called Emmanuel Glesos, Glezos, who is 93 years old, and he is as fit as a flea, and he was elected for Syriza, the Greek Socialist Party, but he's actually left them there because they were too right-wing for him, I think. So, but he's quite an interesting character. He's 93 years old. He's as smart as a pin. He's a very sharp mind. But during the Second World War, he was a partisan, and he and a partisan colleague of his managed to get on top of the Acropolis, and they pulled down the swastika, which was flying from the Acropolis, and made escape, and they were convicted in absentia and sentenced to death and caught and escaped, and he was injected with tuberculosis, and he was quite a character, and there are various people throughout the Parliament, of course not least our own Nigel Farage, but everybody seems to be very hypnotised by this evangelical approach to an ever bigger Europe. And one of the tragedies, I think, is one of the lies that have been said so many times, and we've heard this from the year dot, is that, well, the good thing about Europe, of course, is that since the Second World War, it's kept the peace. Well, actually, to my contention, it's NATO that's kept the peace since the Second World War, and you have Article 5 of NATO, which has allowed countries such as France to opt out of any particular military action which hasn't been in their interests. But of course that doesn't apply with the European Union, with various association agreements being signed. And if we listen to what Jean-Claude Juncker, the new President of the Commission, said only this week, you know, the plans were afoot for a European Union army. Because what I feel they're doing, I feel the provocation with Russia is not just provoking Russia, but it's actually playing into Russia's hands, because it gives Russia the chance to be the strongman, and that is exactly where Putin wants to be. He wants to be the big time potato Charlie, like you say, where I come from originally. He wants to be the guy who's showing that he really is the strong player here. But of course, the danger is at the same time we have this call for this European army, which incidentally, I don't know who the troops are meant to swear their allegiance to. It's been called for at exactly the same time as there was a call in a debate in the chamber on Wednesday I spoke in, with regards to a common and foreign and defence policy, security, and which will move on to defence policy. Well, what strikes me is how different the 28 member states are. You know, we have countries such as Ireland, my wife's Irish, we have countries such as Ireland and Austria and Sweden who are traditionally neutral. You know, they have taken a neutral stance, but of course by pushing for this common, homogenised, harmonised, pasteurised approach, they're trying to make us all the same. And that to me is dangerous. And from being, let's be selfish here, from a British perspective, our foreign policy interests are far different to most of the member states. You know, we once had the largest empire in the history of mankind. We have far more international interests in other parts of the world than most of the, probably with the exception of France, than most of the other member states. And it's interesting that at the same time tensions arose in Ukraine with Russia, Putin got his diplomatic chessboard out. And so what we found, we know how desperately short our own armed forces are. It strikes me actually that what they're up to, not just in the UK but across the member states, is actually weakening our armed forces so we can move towards a common EU army. I'm convinced of that. I really do believe that. But of course, they're not looking at the bigger picture, because Putin's got his diplomatic chessboard out and he's thought, okay, well how can I put extra pressure on the British government? So what he's gone away and done is he signed a wheat for long-range bombers loan deal with Argentina. So now Argentina has a fleet of long-range bombers. Now, I didn't go to university, I've only got a couple of CSEs and a couple of O-levels, I'm not the most educated guy in this room. But I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to work out what Argentina possibly want long-range bombers for. So, on the back of this diplomatic folly, not just from the British government, but from the European Union, the British government has had to go away and spend £200 million more, which we hadn't budgeted for, to prop up our strategic defences in the South Atlantic. And how can we have a foreign defence policy or security policy with countries such as Spain? I spoke in the chamber on this very point on Tuesday night at about 10 o'clock. And I was heckled and, as my dad used to say, if you're not upsetting anyone, son, you're not achieving anything. Well, I certainly upset this Spanish MEP because, you know, you could sort of see the smoke coming out of his ears. I made the point of how can we have a common defence and foreign policy with a country such as Spain when she keeps being so aggressive with regards to Gibraltar. Now, we had a situation only a few months ago, irrespective of the constant nudging by Spanish fishing boats around Gibraltarian sovereign waters, But we actually had a civilian airliner coming into land on a rock, which was spooked by 2 Spanish military planes. Now, how can that be that we could, God forbid, what would have happened if that plane had crashed? And that just shows the aggression. So, and of course, this is at a time where Spain keeps her sovereign claims on the rock, completely ignoring the Treaty of Utrecht at the end of the 1700s. But she won't give up her 2 sovereign territories in the north of Morocco. So it's absolute hypocrisy. So to my mind, we need to get away from thinking that we have to make the European Union bigger. We've got association agreements with so many different countries. But to my mind, the biggest tragedy, irrespective of the death and destruction across the Ukraine, the biggest tragedy of all is that we're not looking at the bigger picture. Because I hope you'd all agree with me, the biggest threat to civilization since the rise of Nazism in the 30s is what we're witnessing across the Middle East with the rise of Islamic fundamentalism. Now, whether we like Putin or not, and as I say, I really don't, we have to accept that we need to build a diplomatic approach in a wider tackle against this evil, barbarous cancer which is spreading. So we need Putin, because Putin is able, through his diplomatic channels and his dealings and wheelings and dealings, to reach out to countries such as Iran and Syria, who wouldn't touch the West with a barge pole. But yet Iran and Syria are equally as concerned about the rise of Islamic states, or Daesh, as they call it, as we are. So why are we actually going out of our way to provoke Russia further? To me, it's absolutely ridiculous. Nigel appointed me Commonwealth spokesman at the beginning of last week for the party, which is a huge honour. Because I see the Commonwealth as that great forgotten organisation that we turned our back on so terribly in 1973. This was the very organisation that fought and died with us in 2 bloody world wars. This is this very same organisation now that makes up 15% of the world's wealth. This is the very same organisation that makes up 25% of the world's population. And it strikes me that with an organisation such as that, and with so many British people who have their own family links to Commonwealth countries, apart from our own, it surely makes sense that we should actually be reaching out to the Commonwealth and re-engaging it, but not just stopping with the Commonwealth, which incidentally now includes countries like Mozambique, who were never part of the old British Empire. We should be reaching out to the Commonwealth and reaching out to the emerging markets and saying, because after 42 years, when we joined the Common Market in that referendum in 75 that I spoke about, after 42 years, there is a better option. Because I was only 3 years old when we joined the Common Market. And it strikes me that we're not the party, we're not the people who are looking to the past. We're looking to the future. And it is in fact the Euro-federalists, it's our opponents, the Lib Lab Con, who are the party who are looking to the past. Because the European Union, quite frankly, is a 19th century idea for a 20th century problem. And we have to be looking beyond that. I'm an umbrella maker when I get a chance. When I do business with buying components in on the other side of the world, it's done at the press of a button. The world has become a far smaller place than it was even 10 years ago. And we have to look at how the world is changing. We have countries forming their own groups. We have the Mint organisation now, which is made up of Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria and Turkey. And they're trying to pull together to form an economic bloc of their own. And Turkey, there's a country. Turkey is doing so little to stop the porous borders, doing so little to stop Islamic State spreading its poison. And yet, it's Turkey who's a candidate country for membership of the European Union. So when Turkey joins the European Union, incidentally, supported by all the 3 other main political parties in this country, especially the Conservative Party. So when Turkey joins the European Union, what we're going to actually find, because of the numbers of the game, because of the size of the population, it's going to be Turkey and Germany who become the 2 main countries in the European Union. And everybody else will be made to suffer further. So we need to be looking further than Turkey. And the times, as Bob Dylan once said, they are a-changing. Because we saw what happened in European election in 2014. They said, we went to the front in the polls, which is nowhere anybody really needs to be in 2 or 3 weeks before election. You like to be sort of coming up the inside rail. But we held our ground. And despite a most vociferous, vicious attack on us, we got 4.2 million votes. In the West Midlands region, where Jill, Bill and I got elected, we got 428,000 votes. So we went from no MEPs, because we'd lost the 2 previous MEPs here, who were elected for UKIP. They both went off in a sulk and a paddy stomping their feet, because they weren't team players. So we actually went from no MEPs to winning the European elections. And it strikes me that the momentum's carried on since then. Because, as Richard said, it's good when you both called Richard, because if I forget what one said something, I'll just say Richard. So when Richard said, look what happened, you know, and what did happen after the European elections? I said, oh, bless you. They said, well, I didn't say bless you, but they said it's a flash in the pan. You watch what happens now. And what happened next? Well, Douglas Carswell did the honourable thing by resigning as a Member of Parliament to force a by-election, because he said, I've been elected by the good citizens of Clacton constituency, and if I want to join a different party of a different colour, I have to put it to you for your support. And it was a foregone conclusion. The Tories were going to do everything they could to stop us, and of course he got over 60% of the votes. And then of course a poor Labour MP passed away, and there was another by-election on the same day, because at the UKIP conference at the end of last year, on Ed Miliband's doorstep in Doncaster, Mark Breckler stood up and announced he was resigning from the Conservative Party, and again he forced a by-election. This time, as Richard said, Cameron said, we're going to throw the kitchen sink at them. Well, he didn't put the plug in, did he? Because look what happened. We won the by-election, but what was even more interesting, was on that night, there was another by-election, which Richard referred to, in Haywood and Middleton, the 34th safest Labour Party seat in the country. Now, I didn't campaign once in Clacton. I spent my time. What really happened was the Midlands and Northern MEPs worked in Haywood and Middleton, while the Eastern region and Southern MEPs worked in Clacton. Sorry, in Rochester. No, sorry, in Clacton. Yeah, that's right. And I was there, out knocking on doors on election day, and I knew we were onto something, because what people were saying, I've already voted for you, because they're so let down by Labour. The Kinnock factor had come in once again. I think people really feel, as they did with Neil Kinnock all those years ago, when it comes to putting a tick in a box, they can't vote for that man. And that's what makes his politics so interesting. But I knew we were onto something. When I drove along, there was a Labour Member of Parliament, Emma Reynolds. She's the Labour MP for Wolverhampton North East, and I was driving on the road, and I saw her running up and down pathways trying to knock up the Labour vote, and the look of panic in their face. It takes me back to my favourite saying about good old Corporal Jones from Dad's Army. They don't like it up them, and we are putting it up them, and they don't like it, and they can't cope with it, because not only are UKIP now appealing to former disillusioned Conservatives, not only are we appealing to disillusioned Liberal Democrats, not only are we appealing to former Labour voters who feel so let down by this open door immigration policy from the party that's opened up to Eastern Europe and said about 13,000 people will come, and of course when over 1 million did. That shows how good they were with their figures. And not only are we appealing to those disillusioned Labour voters, but the greatest unquantifiable and greatest unknown, and the reason why the Nick Robinsons and the John Penars and the political pundits really can't call what is going to happen on May the 7th is because UKIP is now engaging 20% of our core support. It's coming from people who haven't voted, and this is on Lord Ashcroft's figures himself, who haven't voted in the 2 previous general elections. So it's my contention that we're having the Heineken effect. We're reaching the people that the other parties can't reach. And what this means is that it's all up in the air. We are re-engaging with politics, with the population, like no political party has done. Not since the birth of Keir Hardie's Labour movement at the end of the 1800s of the British people being so ready for a change in British politics. Ladies and gentlemen, I am convinced that that change is coming. If it doesn't come this time, it will come in 2020. But the British people are ready for a change. And for those of you, those doubters who say, if you vote Tory, you get Cameron, I say, well, look what happens. Sorry, if you vote Tory, you get Labour. I say, look what happens in Haywood and Middleton. Look what happened in Eastleigh when Diane James came so near, where if you voted Tory, you got Liberal Democrat. And we are in a situation now where politics is in such a crux that we can move forward and we can get Britain back. I say, on May the 7th, if you vote Tory, if you vote Labour, if you vote Liberal Democrats, you get Jean-Claude Juncker, because we are still ruled by the European Union. But if you vote UKIP, ladies and gentlemen, we have proved you get UKIP. So I say, please look at our campaign slogan, believe in Britain. Believe in Britain. Because we have an opportunity, not, as I said, since the days of Keir Hardie, to change British politics and make a real change, but we can only do it with your help. So please, if you're not a member, join us. If you don't want to join us, support us. Maybe you'll leaflet for us. We're still looking for council candidates. Do what you can. Come aboard and join us at this time where Britain really is changing. Believe in Britain. Believe in yourselves. And on May the 7th, if you really want to see a proper change in our country, I ask you to vote for one of the two Richards in your constituency and get us on that first road to getting our country back. Because the future, ladies and gentlemen, is bright, the future is purple. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Well, now it's your turn. So I think that all the, well, both candidates and Jim would like some searching questions. So over to you.
Well, that wasn't too bad, was it?
They've obviously answered all the questions.
If you're allowed to pay tax, like this tax of £10,000, yeah, and if you're a pensioner who has got a very small pension, why is he having to pay tax on it if it's below the £10,000?
I couldn't agree more. We're going to be announcing our election manifesto next month, and people say, well, what are all your policies? So obviously, both of the Richards have given you some ideas on our policies, but we're now, the general election campaign isn't a 100-metre sprint, it's a marathon. And manifestos are being finalised, figures are being double-checked, numbers are being crunched, and we have a situation where we are going to be going in with a fully independently costed election manifesto, and we are going to be producing some very interesting manifesto pledges. But I certainly agree with you, it is ridiculous that someone can pay tax all their lives and come to retire and be on such a small income and still end up paying tax.
I mean, I think one of UKIP's pledges is that there'll be no tax on the minimum wage.
That's right.
So I mean, anything, you know,
Anything up to £10,000.
Yeah, well,
But if
minimum
you're a
wage is about
pensioner,
13, I think.
if you're a pensioner, yeah, and you've got two little pensions plus your state pension, yeah, which comes under that £10,000, why should you be paying tax on it?
I agree. Watch this space. Watch this space.
One more question.
And there is, but before you ask that question, of course, there is the other issue, what UKIP have already announced, is that we will abolish inheritance tax. It seems ridiculous that we have a situation where people can work hard all their lives, seek to better themselves, seek to leave a nest egg, and a huge tax bill is paid on, quite frankly, on money that's already been taxed. So UKIP do pledge to abolish inheritance tax.
If they're going to electrify all the railways, which they're trying to do, and they're shutting down all the coal stations, coal power stations, I think we've only got about 2 nuclear power stations. What are we going to do? Running on the wind farm?
I think that was a green policy, isn't it, to electrify the railways? And I think they're currently electrifying the line, is it, from London to Bristol, and it's taking years and costing hundreds of millions of pounds. So I don't think they're going to get around the country very quickly. And I mean, coming back to what you said is, are we going to have enough energy to generate the electricity for all these railways anyway, if we're going to be reliant on wind turbines?
And electric cars.
Any other questions?
Could you just explain, when you go to vote in the general election, people talk about the percentages of seats that you have to win to actually get a member of parliament into parliament. How does that work?
It's first past the post. So the system we work under at the moment is the candidate who gets the highest number of votes in a constituency is a person returned to parliament. So we could have a situation where we get 16, 18, 20% of the votes and return a handful of candidates. And obviously this is what was a problem sort of for the Liberals, for the SDP Alliance, the old Liberals, was, and in fact in fairness to Nick Clegg's party as well, where they secured such a high percentage of the vote, but returned a relatively few numbers. But the system we're working in this general election is a candidate with the highest numbers of votes wins the seat.
So if you've got, say, for example, the Tory MP already in a seat, and then a UKIP person challenges the Tory person, do they have to take exactly the same amount of votes? Or?
No, it's like all bets are off. So once the election is called, you'll have a new candidate. You'll have a new candidate here. Where are we? We're West here, aren't we? Yeah.
Yes, but I know these people are actually from Mid-Worcestershire.
You're Mid-Worcestershire. So with Peter Love standing down, obviously you've got Nigel there, their new candidates. Okay. There will be obviously Richard on the ballot paper, the Conservative, the Liberal Democrat, the Labour, maybe the Greens, maybe an Independent, maybe I don't know, the Monster Roving Noonie Party or whoever. But don't laugh about them. They beat me in 2001 in Cheltenham. So had a laugh. I got beaten by that titan of British politics, dancing Ken Haynes, but in the old days. Yeah, so it's a party that secures the most votes win the seat. But you've got to vote for what you believe in. If you believe that the Earth's flat and the Flat Earth Party is standing, vote for what you believe in.
I'd like to ask the question, how worried are you if there was an alliance with Labour and SNP? Do you want to take
Well, people say about this, or they're worried about the SNP getting all these extra seats. It's going to help Labour. Currently, nearly every seat the SNP will take, is if they take all these extra seats, will nearly all be at the cost of Labour. So if SNP gets another 20 seats, Labour's going to lose 20 seats to them. So I don't see where the scaremongering, people they're getting worried about it, but there's no worry because they're not suddenly going to magic 20 extra seats on top of Labour's total. They're going to take them. And the other thing is, because a lot of people don't realise it down the south, as I said, my sister-in-law living in Consett, UKIP are going to be the challenger in most of the Labour seats. And believe you me, we're going to take a number of those seats. So Labour are going to lose a lot of seats there. And I mean, one thing, even the Labour Party don't like their leader. He's our best trump card. It's going to, don't worry about it. With him in control, we're safe. We're not going to see red headed.
We hope so.
Exactly. It's going to be Nigel supporting somebody else. We'll be there.
But of course, a major problem arises is, say, if the Conservatives are actually the largest party, but between them, the Labour and the SNP can muster more support, you'd then end up with potentially a party calling the shots that
What's interesting?
top the poll.
What's interesting, and I did a TV, a radio debate against Gazina Stewart, who's a Labour Member of Parliament for Birmingham Edgbaston the other day, and she's called to stop the SNP, Conservative Labour alliance, and I wouldn't laugh about it because I actually think it's a very real possibility, and the reason I believe it's a real possibility is for two reasons: to stop the SNP, but I think there is a far better reason for David Cameron to go into alliance with the Labour Party. And that, of course, is that he can use that as an excuse not to hold a referendum on the European question in 2017.
That's absolutely true.
So, if there is a coalition, we've said we won't go into coalition with anybody. We would be no matter the colour of the party that's in government, we would perhaps give the minority support on certain issues we might agree on in the vote in the House of Commons, but we have no interest, and we have formally ruled out going into a coalition. But I really wouldn't be surprised, because it suits Cameron very much to kick that referendum. Cast iron Dave, remember what he said? You have that cast iron guarantee, you know. And he said on immigration, you know, I will reduce the figures to tens of thousands.
Yeah.
If you don't trust me, don't vote for me. Well,
you know why? Because he's a Conservative.
Well, cast iron.
May I just offer a view on that? I'm very concerned about the approach that theorises what happens if between other parties. And for me, things tend to be, I'm afraid, fairly distinct. They drop into one box or another one. You either don't want the rest of them, in which case you vote for UKIP, or you risk it.
Yeah.
And I think the notion of voting tactically, or trying to work out percentages, or trying to work out or second guess what might be the alliances, is actually a game for monks. It's very simple. If you want a Conservative, fine, vote for a Conservative. If you want a Socialist, fine, vote for it. But don't do it because you think that you're doing something clever.
and that's
If you want a clear cut, and the only party that is quite explicit about where it stands in relation to Europe, where it stands in relation to social cohesion, and where it stands in relation to the responsibility of the other parties who have caused the social problems we have, and the industrial problems we have, and the problems we have with the health service, there's actually only one vote. And it is this one. It is you.
Just one more point on that subject. I was on a building site a few weeks ago. There was a plant mechanic there fixing an excavator for a machine that was broken down. He was talking to the driver, and then this guy, he knew me, he knew what I was about. And he said to this driver, he said, "You vote UKIP this election coming?" He goes, "No, I'm not." He said, "Oh, you haven't made your mind up then?" He said, "It's either you're voting UKIP or you haven't decided yet." He said, that's it. Yeah, you vote UKIP or you're still undecided. With everything else, you don't know what you're going to get. UKIP you do.
Do you reckon we could get Jacob Rees-Mogg coming over?
No, you've got more chance of Saddam Hussein standing up in the middle of a state banquet in Buckingham Palace and singing My Yiddish Shema.
Well, he seems to have a lot of
He's
what I was.
a nice man. He's a nice man, Jacob, but he bleeds blue. You know.
He has been approached by UKIP in Bath over the last 18 months, and he has rejected all blandishments.
James?
Yeah, what do you think the odds are of another general election taking place within the next year?
No, I'm not so sure. Oh, sorry.
I think it's pretty unlikely, actually, is all I can really say. I know people are saying it could happen, because it might be that there won't be any coalitions might not form to provide a strong enough government, so it might well be that the country might have to, go back to the country again. But I personally think it's probably fairly unlikely.
The reason I think it's unlikely is the way we're eating into the Labour vote, and I think, if anything, it may give. We will break through. We will win seats. We will win seats. I'm convinced of that. But I think, whilst the Labour Party is led by Ed Miliband, I think and certainly what I'm hearing from politicians from across the spectrum is that they're not convinced that Labour can win this election.
Well, if Labour's trying to get a mansion tax out, surely all the front bench of Labour are multi-millionaires anyway. So they're going to lose out, aren't they?
Well, that's why they're saying this, because they know they're not going to get in, so they're not going to have to pay the tax.
Anyone else? Can I ask where the commitment to a referendum as a legal construct comes from? Is there any other way of leaving the European Union apart from via a referendum?
Yes, if we had a government that wanted to leave the European Union, we'd repeal the Treaty of Rome, and then we'd just start dismantling all the apparatus and civil servants and bureaucrats, etc.
So a majority government could do it that way.
Do it.
And you wouldn't
Yeah,
get
you get
fined, you
governments
wouldn't get
that would.
fined for doing that, do you?
No, we couldn't, because I mean, we do have a legal obligation under the Lisbon Treaty. So it's Article 50, isn't it? To apply to leave. And we actually view it as a party. We're not just going to stick two fingers up as much as we'd like to and say, hit the road, Jack.
Okay.
What we will do is we have a legal obligation to apply under Article 50 to leave the European Union. But if, and this, what would happen is that they would dig their heels in, if they made it as difficult as possible for us, which they would, we would just, and it's what everybody forgets, especially the Conservative and Labour parties and the Liberal Democrats, is that there is a parliamentary tradition that no parliament can find its successor. And that is a long-standing principle. So it's very simple. We, as Richard says, we repeal the Treaty of Rome, which was incorporated under the European Communities Act of 1972. And it's a very quick process. The quickest Act of Parliament ever passed, going from first reading to royal assent, was actually the Application Act of 36, when Edward VIII abdicated. And that went through all the parliamentary stages and got royal assent within 36 hours. So that's how quickly it can be done. As long as we've put the core principle in place. I mean, this is why, and I'm sure Richard would say the same, this is why in 1996 I joined UKIP, because I didn't believe in a referendum, because we will have a referendum, and we've seen subsequently, I believe I've been proved right, because we saw what happens in Ireland, in Denmark, in the Netherlands, in France, when various referendums, be it on Nice, be it on Amsterdam, be it on latter treaties, we saw what happened when that country voted no. They said, well, are you sure? So they asked the question again. They wouldn't have said, are you sure, if they'd voted yes. I can be certain of that. So, and of course we know Mr Cameron has already stated, the Prime Minister has already stated that he believes Britain's place in the European Union. He said he'd be campaigning to stay in. So it's all very well offering a referendum. One has to remember that, last year, was it £22 million was paid to the BBC by the European Union, and that didn't show up in any of his accounts. So
but even the chap who runs the BBC, any Labour MP or ex-Labour?
No, well, but there's in fairness, there's political interest from all parties. I mean, Chris Patten was a former DG, and he was also cabinet minister for the Conservative Party. But we're against the establishment. That's what it's about. I don't say, oh, we're anti-Labour, we're anti the establishment, because the establishment have a vested interest in the European Union, and that is why we're getting the attacks and being misquoted. And, I mean, it's really funny. I gave a speech on anti-Semitism about 10 to 12 on Wednesday night in Strasbourg, and somebody tweeted, another bald white public school educated UKIP MEP. Well, somebody tweeted back, well, you clearly don't know Jim Carver then. So. And we're going to get this a lot, but do you know what? I'm very comfortable. I know for a party I've worked so long for and so long with, I'm very confident in who we are and what we are as a party and what we stand for. And at the end, the truth will always out.
Can I just tell you why I really joined UKIP?
It wasn't to make me, was it?
No, I'll tell you why I make you laugh. Because I sat on the Conservative committee in West Malvern, and it was prior to the European elections of 1994.
Yeah.
And they were talking about going out canvassing on behalf of the Conservative Party, and I didn't believe in the European Union, and I said, well, I don't think this is right, because I don't want to go out canvassing for something I don't believe in. I was an idealist, if you like. And there was a little bit of a row between myself and the chairman and the chairman's mother, whose house the meeting happened to be held in. And I know there were people sitting around the table who agreed with me, but nobody actually backed me up. So anyway, I had a bit of a row and I was put in my box, as it were. And when it came to coffee and cake time, she went round with the shortbreads, and I put my hand out to take the shortbread, and she lifted it over my head like that and passed it on to the next person. And I thought, well, I'm not going to stick this any longer, and went and joined UKIP.
That was the most expensive plate of biscuits Conservatives ever put out.
Okay, we'll take one more question.
Where do you stand with regard to tuition fees for university students?
As I said, skills that we need, mathematics, anybody for doctors, nurses for medical trade, and also engineers, there will be no tuition fees. These are skills that we need, real jobs for real people. There will be free tuition for all courses on those subjects.
But university students, are they going to have reduced fees, or are you going to keep it at the £9,000 that it is
At the moment, all I can say is we will abolish the fees on those courses which are providing skills that we need. We want real jobs for the kids. Do the courses where there's a real job. There's so many courses where you don't get a job at the end of it. So we want to encourage the kids to go and work in the skills when they get a good job.
It's been the policy of successive governments to send 60% of young people to university, and as we know, an awful lot of them can't get a job or not a job in what they've been trained to do. Unfortunately, they end up in supermarkets, and actually we've got several graduates we employ behind the receptionist desk at work. And it's been a wrong policy because, of course, now there's a big shortage, isn't there? Plasterers, bricklayers, plumbers, and all those people. And of course, most of all, a lot of Eastern Europeans now are coming in, but that's exactly right.
And I think you raised a question of teaching. Yes, very much so, because very much like medicine, it's a vocation. You don't think, you don't become a teacher because you want to sit up marking books at 10 o'clock on a night when you could be curled up on the sofa with your husband. You go into teaching because very much as you do medicine, it's a vocation. People don't say I want to be a casualty ward doctor because I want to be working 18-hour shifts and becoming fraught with nerves. So it's very much about supporting those. But what we're against is what we call the Maureen Lipman approach. Remember the BT advert? Oh, he's got an ology. Everybody's got to get an ology nowadays. And actually, something that somebody touched on over there. Something we can, and you probably, if you're not a UKIP member, you'd probably be surprised to hear a UKIP MEP say this. It's something we can learn from Germany, because what the Germans have done very well is actually created a national psyche where you don't have to have an ology, but what you can have is a technical qualification. And we all know, but there are some children who just aren't. I wasn't educationally minded, and possibly if I'd been born 20 years before, I would have gone to a technical school. So what we want to do is have that national parity where an engineer or a skilled craftsman is as highly thought of as somebody working in the health service or like that. So I hope that gives you the answer.
Don't we need to bring into education the practical skills as well as the education?
Very much so, yeah. So obviously we're for grammar schools. We're big support for grammar schools for the very reason that is the best way for class mobility.
Yeah.
If you look back to the 1960s, it's not since the 1960s, during the times of grammar schools when so many working class children went to Oxbridge. And we do want to bring in sort of more technical schools to sort of have parity with the grammar schools.
Because I think it's very careful. UK policy is to have grammar schools, but I think we've got to be very careful that we don't forget the people who aren't quite so academic. We don't want to go back to the old system I remember growing up with, where you had grammar schools and you had secondary moderns, and once you're in the secondary modern, your future wasn't all that bright. So I think it's very important that we don't forget those people who just academically aren't quite so bright, but might be good with their hands, and we must provide good training for them as well.
Well, that's what the Conservatives destroyed, didn't they?
Well, successive Labour and Conservative governments, yes.
Yeah. In your NHS policy, will you be bringing back, what do they call them?
Matrons?
No.
Yes.
State and
Matrons.
yes.
Yeah.
No. teaching hospitals.
That's what they need back.
Yeah. Because when I was a young kid, and I worked in Smithville Meat Market in the City of London, but
That's right.
was
That's
the
right.
biggest hospital
Yeah.
in the whole of Europe. It was the biggest teaching hospital in the whole of Europe. They sent their people from all over the world to get taught there. There's doctors, nurses, and consultants, everything. Will you be doing
I
that?
can't give you a direct answer on teaching hospitals, but what we are very keen on is more nursing. You know, we're putting in place an extra £3 billion a year for the National Health Service, and that will eventually be funded from the money that's saved when we withdraw from the European Union. But also, initially, it will be funded from our drastic cut to the foreign aid budget. We think it's ridiculous that so much money on foreign aid is lost quite frankly, to countries that have their own nuclear programs. What we want to do is, rather than just sending money to countries whose dictators or presidents will buy, have a £20 million property portfolio in Paris. What we want to do is, we want to put it into real humanitarian aid. We want to put it into tackling polio, cholera, fresh water, and also natural disasters. Tsunamis, earthquakes. That's what foreign aid should really be used for. And of course, we can push for free trade, because outside at the moment in the European Union, all trade agreements are negotiated by the EU Trade Commissioner, not by the British trade delegation. So if we have a genuine free trade agreement, we can actually encourage the third world. It's something I'm going to be developing in my new role as Commonwealth spokesman with William Dartmouth, who's our international trade spokesman. We're going to be talking very much about trade, not aid. Giving people the ability to actually have the pride in what they're achieving as they build their way to prosperity.